Hello, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to wait a moment just to allow other people to join us. While we're waiting, if you've just joined, can you tell us in the chat box? We'd love to know, which function are you part of? What's your perspective coming into this conversation? Are you part of communications, be that external, internal, or both? Marketing, HR? So if you use the chat box, give us a sense, kind of what's your perspective coming into this conversation? Just help us orientate the conversation. So great. Thank you, Megan. Internal, Danny, thank you. Internal comms engagement. Great to have a sense of internal. Okay, good. That's what we were kind of expecting, but we may well get a few colleagues who are joining from other functions. Corporate communications, Katya, thank you. Employer branding strategy, great. Okay, so this will be interesting to hopefully cover your questions on that too. As new people join us, we're just going to give it a moment just to allow others to join, and then we'll get started with what I hope would be a fascinating conversation. Kimberly, thanks. So you're in internal comms engagement as well. You're in good company. It's got a few people who are from that background. Anyone else who's just joined, if you want to put in the chat box, where you're, which function you sit in, that would be really helpful for us to know, and we'll get going in just a moment. Joe, you're in internal comms as well. Great, thank you. You're very welcome, as is everyone else. Have we got anyone who's joined the conversation from HR or outside of communications, I wonder? So more internal comms engagement and culture. Okay, that's interesting. So yeah, we're starting to see this, people and cultures becoming, yes, so someone's from HR. Okay, we're heading up towards 100 attendees. I'm just going to pause for a moment, just let that tick up a bit more. Internal comms, great. You're very welcome, whichever function you're from. We're just curious. Maureen says internal comms supporting HR and culture and community teams and community. Great to hear, Maureen. Oliver, non-executive director, yeah, very welcome. Culture and change management, internal comms within the HR department. That might be something we touch on as we go through. And business services, internal comms, HR comms, change management. Great. Okay, we've ticked up to 100 attendees. So I am going to kick things off. You're all very welcome. Thank you very much for joining the session today. My name is Joss Mathieson. I'm the Chief Encouragement Officer at Change Oasis, which is a specialist change, communications and culture consultancy. I'm a former communications director for companies like Barclays and GSK, but now I coach leaders, teams and organizations on how to change their story in order to change the world. And I'm going to be your host for this session about closing the gap, how to turn your EVP aspiration into employee experience reality. And I think it's going to be a fascinating discussion as I'm joined by two people with huge experience in this area. I think we're all going to learn a lot. So Yvonne O'Hara and Sarah Whitmore, thank you both for being here.
Thank you,
Yvonne, can we start with you? Please say hi and tell everyone a bit more about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I am currently 4 days in. I'm the new head of internal comms, people and transformation at NatWest Group. And I know you would have seen as part of the event promo, I was group head of internal comms at Mitie Group PLC. So I'll start with NatWest because that's my most recent appointment, literally 4 days in. So NatWest Group is one of the biggest leading UK banks. And it, as a bank, employs 80,000 people, has 19 million customers, and the organization is very, very purpose-driven in terms of its strategy. And as a bank, we're about championing potential, and that's about championing the potential of people, businesses, and families to help them thrive. And that, of course, includes colleagues within that. But most of the experience I'm going to draw on today, Joss, is from my previous role as Group Head of Internal Comms and Engagement at Mitie Group PLC. Now, you've probably never heard of Mitie. They're a facilities management company, leading one here in the UK, but have a small presence globally. And they look after a lot of the businesses, hospitals, university, and big brands here in the UK, from Sainsbury's to Lloyds Banking Group. I've worked across a range of different sectors, from oil and gas, education, central government and policing, mostly in internal communication, but have also spent some time working in public relations, corporate comms and marketing. So I adore internal comms. I love employee engagement. I'm an employer brand and culture specialist. That's the thing that really fires me up. And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Fantastic. And congratulations on the new role, Yvonne.
Thank
Very
you.
early days, but I think you're already gaining some insights, and I'm sure you'll share some of that alongside great reflections from other organisations. And Sarah, delighted to have you join us as well. Please, can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, thanks, Joss. Really delighted to be here too. Sarah Whitmore, I'm Group Head of Talent Inclusion Engagement at a company called DS Smith. Let me just say a few words on who DS Smith is. We're in the FTSE 100. We're a company whose products everybody probably touches every day. So we make paper. We turn that paper into cardboard packaging, and we're actually a very big business, 30,000 colleagues, revenue of 7.2 billion. So we make an awful lot of boxes for 7.2 billion pounds worth of revenue. I've been in the organisation for about 18 months. We are a manufacturing company, so the vast majority of our employees work in manufacturing facilities, or heavy paper making is actually heavy industry as well. So we've got a very unique profile, I guess, of colleagues across the group. Previous experience in Rolls-Royce in engineering and Joss Mathieson chemical engineering companies, and in pharmaceuticals too in AstraZeneca, and previously in an IT and outsourcing industry. So again, like Yvonne, varied experiences across a number of different industries, and like Yvonne, absolutely passionate about inclusion and engagement agenda and how important it is to businesses.
Brilliant. I mean, hopefully everyone gets this impression, just hearing the number of different organisations and sectors you both worked in. I think we're going to learn a lot in this conversation. So fantastic. Looking forward to getting into the insights and ideas. Before we do that, though, Yvonne, I'd like to come back to you. I think we should probably try and clarify a little bit. I don't think we should assume everyone knows what we're talking about. So we're going to be discussing how to turn your EVP, generally accepted to mean employee value proposition, how to turn the EVP aspiration into employee experience reality. Now, we hear this jargon quite a lot, though, so I'm wondering if I could ask you to clarify. In your view, what is EVP?
Sure. So for me, an EVP is the articulation of your brand. So it's absolutely about celebrating and representing all of what makes up your brand. So obviously as a brand, you either produce products or services, but what actually sits behind that brand is, of course, your colleagues. And an employee value proposition is about shining a light on the colleagues, the culture, the values, the mission, the purpose of that organization. But also more broadly, it's also the overall reward package that organization offers, from career development to learning and development to pay to benefits. So it's the whole piece together. But I like to think about it as really your brand brought to life by the people who make that business a success. And that, of course, is your colleagues.
That's a really nice definition. I like that. So keep it simple. Very nice. Okay, Sarah, can I ask you, as a build on that, the other term we hear a lot is EX, or employee experience. So how does EVP link to EX?
So I think in really simple terms, the employee experience is almost it's the double click of the EVP. What is the experience that people are actually getting in an organization? So a brand might say one thing, but the experience is, how is that actually brought to life in how people are treated, what they experience in the company? And we're looking at this at the moment in a very simple way, and we're looking at the the key touch points in the life cycle of a person that works in an organization, from the very first point when they're attracted to the company, their experience through selection, through onboarding, recruitment, performance management, but it's also about how they're managed in the organization and the culture. So all of those experiences need to line up and reflect that employee brand. So really, it's just as simple as, how do you bring that to life in the organization? And that's what really matters.
Great. So clear connection between the two. You know, one, perhaps, as we've said in the title of this session, a bit more aspirational. The experience is reality. How well do they match up? So maybe I can follow up with you. So what's the context for this discussion today? Particularly interested in your perspective, given your role leading talent. Why does EVP matter in today's world?
So look, I mean, I guess this is what we're facing in DS Smith. So as I said, we employ people working in manufacturing environmts. That includes working shift work in different conditions, I guess. If they're working in some of them dirty conditions, that is the bulk of the people we employ. The fact of the matter is that now the global workforce is shrinking, number one. Number two, where the GDP is in the world versus the availability of labour, there's a mismatch in those two things. We've got pressure on wages because of raising inflation. So really now the employee is in the driving seat because that workforce is shrinking. And it's made even more extreme for us because actually the jobs that we're offering, people don't really want to do shift work in manufacturing facilities anymore. And when they're doing shift work and there's other things, when there's other things to be offered outside of that, then they may choose and do something else. So an EVP is no longer a nice to have. We've got to have a way of attracting people into the organisation. Why would they come and work for us? And make sure that experience lives up to that. Otherwise, simply put, they'll go somewhere else because they can. And I think that's the context now that's so different, certainly pre-pandemic, but we're seeing a very different set of I guess, labour market conditions. And that's really something that's on the mind of our senior leadership teams in DS Smith.
Yeah, that's really helpful perspective. So maybe we can dive a bit deeper into that. And Yvonne, can I come to you? So given that context that Sarah's just shared, how can EVP help companies? What's the opportunity? What are the challenges in closing that gap? Maybe you can share some insights from Mitie, maybe even NatWest, your initial impressions. I think it would help people to bring that to life.
Sure. And I think what Sarah's touched on is, of course, the attraction element of an EVP. And when you've got a challenging job environment, you've got to you've got to set yourself apart from your competitors in order for people to come and work for you. And EVPs have always been traditionally around attraction, but of course there is much about retention as well. So most organizations face issues around attrition, and attrition is a huge issue for the same reason that it's difficult to recruit people in. You know, colleagues today will vote with their feet if the lived experience of working in the organization does not live up to their expectation, or they get poor leadership. So it's as much about attraction as it is retention. And I think probably from my perspective as an internal communicator, my focus is more around the retention, but obviously there's a cut across into the attraction element as well. So there's a brilliant opportunity for organizations, whatever size that organization is, because it provides an opportunity to distinguish yourself in the marketplace, really. And I think without articulating what you do clearly, it's going to be very, very difficult to compete. And there's a lot of opportunities with your employee value proposition in terms of, what you can do with it. And I think one of the best aspects of the EVP that I've worked on most recently at Mitie Group PLC was the ability to align it much more closer to colleague voice. Now, again, I'm using a jargony term, so I'll break that down. Colleague voice is essentially the opportunity for colleagues to share their feedback and for that feedback to be actioned on. And research has shown that one of the hallmarks of highly engaged organizations are organizations that listen and respond to colleague feedback. And an EVP offers opportunities to listen to that feedback in different ways. So one way to do that when you are thinking about your employee value proposition is, how do you get your colleagues involved in the actual creation of it? So how do you listen to what they care about in terms of the people who work in the organization and what kind of an organization and culture they want to work in? And how do you build your EVP from there? But also, certainly from my experience in Mitie, we were also able to, and I should probably explain, at Mitie, we were creating an employee value proposition from scratch. At NatWest, we have an existing employee value proposition and some established values, but we're looking more at Sarah's area that she highlighted around the actual colleague experience. So I should say, depending on your role, depending on the organization you work for, the size of the team, you might be on different stages of your EVP journey. But certainly in creating the EVP, one of the things we were able to do, working closely with HR and marketing, was to look at actually what are the pillars of activity that fall underneath that EVP. And we created those based on the whole rewards piece. So one of those was around colleague voice, and we called it My Voice. And what we were able to do with that was to bring together all of the aspects of colleague listening that existed in the organization, which were all great, but quite disparate. So your annual employee engagement survey, listening from the board, individual regional listening sessions, through to people being able to email the CEO and say what bothered them. So we're able to bring that all together under one pillar called My Voice. And that was very, very powerful in terms of really demonstrating that as an organization, we were interested in and passionate about listening to our colleagues, particularly our colleagues working on the front line, because we have lots of cleaners and security guards who are hard to reach. So we're really interested in hearing from them and really interested in responding to their feedback.
Yeah, that's really useful to hear, and I'm struck actually, because by listening, we're able to get some insight. So I think whichever side of the organisation you sit on, whether it's on the internal communication side or the HR side, the insight you can get is hugely valuable to then have influence with your senior leaders, with other stakeholders. So we'll come back to that in a moment. So I think the partnership between internal communications and HR is something really useful to explore. Sarah, I'm going to bring you in, and actually Katia has asked a question which I think builds on what Yvonne's saying there. Maybe I can get you to give a DS Smith perspective. And Katia has asked, how do you really involve colleagues? Because there's so many different needs, wishes. She says, we've discussed with a selection of colleagues, how to develop the EVP, but still, when do you really cover all the bases? So I think she's highlighting there are lots of different views, what people want. So linking EVP and employee experience, how have you used data? How do you approach that challenge that Katia's outlined? What do you do at DS Smith around that?
So we've recently done some work exactly on this point. It's I don't think it's not rocket science what we've done, Joss, but basically we've looked at some key stakeholder groups. So we've done a number of listening sessions across our sites to have a discussion with people to say what's important to you. And we've gathered that feedback. We've also talked to other different populations in the company. But the other thing we've also done is talk to our customers, because at the end of the day, our customers are incredibly, we are a low margin, high volume business. The packaging world it's changing beyond belief. Who knew it could be working with pet cardboard boxes could be this exciting, but it really is. So the other perspective we brought in is our customers, because at the end of the day, how we treat our employees is what in turn they're going to do to our customers. So we've also brought them in and just really tried to look at what's that feedback saying in terms of what is really important to people. And I think we've had to segment our workforce, because working in a factory, which I've done, working night shifts in a packaging plant, is a different, there's a different experience or perhaps set of expectations there, just different from other roles that we've got in the organisation. So we've tried to synthesize that and look at some personas within our organisation to create where do we focus next? What are the simple things we can start to do now to give the experience to our employees that they in turn can take on to our customers? So I don't think there's any magic behind this apart from just getting really organised, you know, understanding those different perspectives. And as I say, the customer lens has been incredibly useful and very powerful, because when we're playing this back to our senior stakeholders too.
Yeah, it's really important. Joss, can I just come in on
of course
that?
You can. Yeah, please do.
I think the customer point is a really important one, because if we think about the impact of the EVP and think of the impact of an organization, every colleague who works for an organization is a brand advocate for that organization, whether they're chatting over a coffee with a family member about where they work, or whether they're interacting with the customer. And actually, if they feel more engaged, if they are fully bought into the organization they work for and love working there, that's going to really come across in terms of your NPS scores, your overall engagement, your productivity. You know, so I think sort of back to your earlier question, Joss, in terms of like the benefits of an EVP, I think Sarah's touched on a really important point, which is actually this isn't just about colleagues or attracting people into the organization. It's also how the organization interacts with customers, which is ultimately how it has license to operate. So it has so many benefits in that respect. And another build I was going to add was when we were developing the EVP in Mitie, we really looked at story in terms of the stories from the colleagues who wanted to be part of it. And our starting point was we wanted diversity of roles, diversity of colleagues, diversity of geographies, to really show that cross section. So we had, you know, we had cleaners, we had security guards, we had people who worked in back office, you know, with all kinds of colleagues who all do completely different roles, because it's really important when you're in an organization to see someone who's like you, or see someone working in your area, because otherwise it doesn't really talk to you. So so I thought I'd just add that, because there are ways that you can, you know, that you can, when you're thinking about your EVP, how do you make sure you just represent that diversity of colleague and role and geography and background through your EVP? It's really important.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, you need to see it to be it. You know, until you have people break through barriers, often, you know, people assume that couldn't be me. You know, that's not often the case. But building on that, you know, I'm keeping an eye on time, because actually we're rapidly kind of marching through our time. Another question that's come in, and Yvonne, maybe I can bring this to you first, you know, building on the point you've made. Any views on tying initiatives such as DE&I, wellbeing and sustainability into the DNA of your EVP? I think that's a really great question. What are your thoughts?
It's a brilliant question. And you absolutely should, because, you know, all of those aspects are linked to your mission, your purpose, and the overall culture of your organization. And, you know, in the interest of time, I'll be really, really brief. What we did at Mitie was, I mentioned earlier, created a number of pillars that sat underneath the EVP. So they represented different aspects of the overall colleague experience and offer. And one of those was my well-being. And what we were able to do with my well-being and my voice was bring in the impact of the diversity networks and how important they are in terms of supporting colleague well-being. We were able to link them to DE&I initiatives as well. We were able to bring in the sustainability aspects and what we were trying to do as a business to reach net zero, which was one of our goals. So I would say absolutely you should bring those things in, because ultimately what will happen when you have an engaged organization is you will have an inclusive organization. A high-performing organization will be an inclusive one. It will be one that cares about sustainability. So bring those things in. They're absolutely brilliant. And you'll find that your colleagues will be so passionate about that. They love seeing those topics being discussed through your EVP. So yes, absolutely, you should be thinking about those things.
Yeah. Sarah, do you want to add a quick comment on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess in DS Smith, look, we've been doing circularity or recycling for decades, and we suddenly realised we'd just not made enough of that whole sustainability piece in our EVP, bringing it to life internally and externally. And I think these things, it's got to be, an EVP's got to be realistic and stretching. But I think now, back to my point about availability of talent, quite frankly, people will pick and choose. People will not come to a company or stay with a company that isn't sustainable or diverse. They can choose to go and work somewhere else. So I think, yeah, absolutely needs to be part of the EVP. And I think that's, you know, really looking at shareholders well are expecting this now of companies too. So I'm just being brief for time, but totally agree with that point.
I want to very quickly squeeze in a question before we wrap things up. So Sarah, let me come to you first and then Yvonne, ask you. So how can communications, we've got a lot of colleagues from internal communications on the call, but a few work in HR. How can comms and HR best partner together on EVP and EX? Sarah, let's come to you first.
I think it's an absolutely critical partnership. Look, I think from a HR perspective, our job is to understand what talent have we got, what do we need, and how do we close the gap? And we're setting out some of the outcomes from a talent perspective. But the branding piece has to be done hand in hand with our communication colleagues. They're the professionals at doing that, the whole listening piece, engaging the organisation around the EVP and how it's brought to life. It has to be done hand in hand with those two functions together.
Fantastic. Yvonne, any builds?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And back to the DE&I point, you know, one of the fantastic outcomes of that collaboration was we as a comms team could work really closely with our head of ED&I and her relationship with the diversity networks to do that shout out for colleagues to say, you know, we'd love to hear from you. Would you like to be part of this? We want to hear what you think about it. So it meant that from the beginning, we were approaching the whole thinking around the look and feel, the brand, the statement, etc., through an inclusive lens. So I mean, I could talk for hours about collaboration, but I would say if you've any kind of them versus us behaviors going on between internal comms and HR, just kill it, because you can do great work solving problems that really matter to your organization, like attrition, attraction, creating a high-performing, inclusive organization. If you come together, you'll be greater than the sum of your parts.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I mean, I think we could go on talking about this topic for a lot longer, but we don't have the time to do so today. Just to wrap things up, I'd love you to give our audience your 3 key takeaways from this session. Sarah, let me come to you first. What would you say? What would your top 3 be?
Top 3 are: 1, the EVP needs to be realistic and stretching. Both of those things. 2, take the time to really understand what is the experience and listen to colleagues. And 3, start small. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference and show you're really listening to people. So those are my 3 takeaways.
Brilliant. Love those. Yvonne, what would you say? What would your 3 be?
So my first one is collaborate. So work with HR, marketing colleagues if you're in comms. So HR, comms, marketing, and if there's a strategy function, get together and talk about the issues that your organization is facing and work together to come up with the solution around how you solve that with your EVP. Secondly, embed colleague voice into your EVP from the beginning. So make it colleague-led, make sure it's insight-driven, you're listening to your colleagues and you're responding to that feedback. Don't create your EVP in a silo, it just won't work. And number 3, role model it through your leaders. So at Mitie Group, we created what we called communications and engagement blueprint. So each MD of our business had, in effect, a boilerplate of things to think about when they were engaging with their people. And part of that was in terms of really bringing that EVP alive, a lot of colleague voice, listening to that feedback. But if you're leaders in the organization at all levels, because I consider anyone who's a manager to be a leader, are role modeling that EVP, it will stick. So they're my top 3 takeaways.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. What a brilliant conversation. I think there's been an introduction, but there's been so much in there that you've shared, both of you, clearly both masters of your trade in this area and spoken with such passion and enthusiasm. It was fantastic. So thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, everyone who's joined this session. I hope it's been really useful. I hope you've got some insights and ideas that you can take. And if nothing else, you take away that this is a golden opportunity to really, really try and match up the experience your employees are getting with the aspiration you have around being an amazing organisation and employer. So I hope you got something useful from it. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of Engage. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.